Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the We the People podcast. My name is Dr. Michael Huffman, and I'm the Executive Director of the Virginia Assembly of Independent Baptists, where we fight every day of our life the uphill battle sometimes of defending your religious liberty against those people that would try to create and pass laws that would take away your religious freedom that was given to us not by the government, but was given to us by our Creator. And so we thank you for joining us tonight. A couple of things I want to remind you of. If you're watching us on Facebook Live, be sure to tap the notification on both Facebook Live and YouTube Live. Subscribe and hit the bell so that you are notified each time that we have a broadcast, and you'll be notified as soon as we go live so that you can join us on the program. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask, anything that's come to your mind, please feel free to call 804 960 4014. That's 804-960-4014, or email me at director@vaib.org. I love to take calls. I love to get emails. I'm even stopped in the grocery store of people wanting legal help and trouble with different things that they've got going on in their church. So it's what we do here at VAIB. We fight for your religious liberty. We represent churches. We don't represent special interest groups. We represent, number one, the Lord Jesus Christ and through his churches. And we're so thankful that we're able to do that. Let's check out our website, www.vaib.org. We'd love for you to go there and visit there. Now, one thing I want to remind you of what we've got going on December the 2nd, that's this coming Tuesday, in Richmond, we have a Operation Hope for Virginia rally that we're having there at 8659 Staples Mill Road in Henrico, Virginia. We're having it at the offices of the Virginia Christian Alliance, where Brother Don Blake runs a good operation out there. And so we want you to join us there. It's going from 1 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. We've got several speakers. We've got Byron Fox that's going to be speaking. Tom Alvis is going to be speaking. Pastor Greg Gray from Smithfield, Virginia is going to be speaking. I'm going to be bringing a legislative update. And so we want you to join us there. Now, it is a free event, but we need you to register. So if you'd go to www.vaib.org, if you look toward the left of the home screen, scroll down to the bottom, you'll see the link that says Operation Hope for Virginia. You can click on that link and fill out the little bit of information that we're asking you to give us, and then you can submit that. That will come to our offices, and we will get you registered. Now, the reason we want you to register is we want to get a good head count of who's coming, because there are going to be some light refreshments there, and we do have limited space. So if we have to change venues at the last minute for a larger space, we would like to know that as soon as possible. But please register if you go to our website and click on Operation Hope for Virginia and fill out the form. But we're excited that you joined us tonight. As I've been advertising on Facebook and YouTube, we have a very special guest with us this evening that I'm going to take some time to introduce to you. They've graciously given of their time to us to come and discuss some things with us tonight. And these two folks have become good friends of not only the VAIB, but good friends of me and my family. And I'm very thankful to the Lord for them. The first person I'm going to introduce to you tonight is Delegate-elect Karen Hamilton. Karen represents the 62nd District of Virginia, which includes parts of Culpeper County, Greene County, parts of Orange, and Madison. Now, I will say this, that Karen handed Sarah Ratcliffe a very sound defeat by defeating her by around 17 percentage points, although being outspent by about $37,000. Karen is a defender of life. She is a defender of, she believes that life begins at the moment of conception. She is a defender of traditional family. She's a defender of religious freedom. And she is a defender of your 2A rights. I remember when I met Karen, I had been trying to email her and I could not get through. And so I'm sitting in the reconvene session last April, and I'm sitting there, and this young lady walks in with two boys, and she's wearing a Hamilton for Delegate jacket. And I look up, and she's just sitting a couple of rows in front of me. And I said, I wonder if that's who that is. And so I got up, and I nonchalantly kind of walked past her like she wouldn't know that I was trying to look to see who she was. And sure enough, that's who it was. And so that started a friendship there. And I've gotten to know Karen very well. The most important thing I can say about Karen is that she is a biblical conservative Christian. She loves the Lord, and she is going to take those principles to Richmond. So, Karen, we want to welcome you to the show tonight. Thank you for taking your time to be with us. We appreciate it very much.
It's good to be with you, Michael. Thanks for that introduction.
Thank you so much. And the next person I want to introduce to you is somebody, probably the only person that she likes better than me. And and so if you've ever met someone for the first time and they make you feel like that you've known them all their life, that's Cameron Hamilton. And I did some math the other day, which sometimes I do, and I was 13 when he was born, so I feel old. And but it's amazing what Cameron has accomplished. Cameron enlisted in the Navy in 2005, where he heroically served his country as a Navy SEAL until 2015. Cameron became the supervisory emergency management specialist of the Department of State from, I believe it was 2015 to 2020. And he then became director of the emergency medical services of the Department of Homeland Security, where he oversaw 4,000 emergency medical technicians along the southern border until 2023. And then he served as the FEMA director until May of 2025. Cameron ran for the 2024 Republican primary for Virginia's 7th Congressional District. He received a bachelor's degree from Campbell University. And of course, Cameron is the husband to his lovely wife, Karen. And Cameron also is a conservative biblical Christian. And Cameron has a beard that most men would kill for. Cameron, thank you for coming on and being with us tonight.
Absolutely.
We appreciate it very much, and it's amazing what you two have accomplished in your short lives. But I want to get right to it because we're 2 minutes behind schedule, and we've got a lot to cover tonight. Thank you both for joining us. We count it an honor that you take your time to be on the We the People podcast. So thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Happy to be here.
The first thing I want to bring up that we want to talk about, and we're going to have you back because we're going to talk about a lot of things as session gets closer and closer and more bills are coming down and being introduced. We're going to talk about tonight, I believe, just the bills that have dropped. There's so much we could talk about, but we're going to talk about just the bills that have dropped. And of course, like most of the We the People podcast, we don't really know what direction all this is going to take us, but we'll see what happens. But the first thing that I want us to discuss is the bill that was dropped by Delegate Ward on HB1, which is the incremental increasement of minimum wage up to $15 an hour by January the 1st of 2028. And the way that I understand the bill is that January 1st, 2026 until January 1st of 2027, they're allowed to pay no less than $12.77 an hour. And then January 1st of 2027 until January 1st of 2028, it's no less than $13.75 an hour. And then January 1 of 2028 until January 1 of 2029, it's no less than $15 an hour. And then after that, it gives people raises based upon the percentage of inflation. Delegate Ward brought this piece of legislation, HB 1928, last year. And let me just read for everybody. I'm sure you guys have read it a million times, but let me read for everybody that's listening. Of course, the governor vetoed it. But let me read for everybody what the governor's veto was. He says, this proposal is an arbitrary mandatory increase in the starting wages of all employees. Such a substantial increase will raise business operational costs. In response, businesses will raise prices, creating more inflation, and implement hiring freezes and layoffs, ultimately hurting the workers the proposal seeks to assist. Implementing an arbitrary $15 per hour wage mandate may not impact Northern Virginia, where economic conditions lead to historically higher wages, but this approach is detrimental for small businesses across the rest of Virginia, especially in Southwest Virginia and Southside. A one-size-fits-all mandate ignores the vast economic and geographic differences and undermines the ability to adapt to regional cost of living differences and market dynamics. I hereby veto. Now, Karen, I'm going to let you go first. I want you, if you could give us your thoughts on the pitfalls of raising the minimum wage.
Mhm.
Sure. Well, I think Youngkin kind of laid it out perfectly. Not only does it harm small businesses, and of course, in the rural areas that I'm representing, it hits us harder than it does any of the cities because we have a lot of just lower level jobs that people depend on, and as far as entry level positions that kids are looking to get to gain some experience, it limits that as well. And so, right off the bat, it's going to hurt my district, but I think what bothers me the most is just the state overreaching, and I'm more of a limited government conservative, and I just believe that two adults can work out a wage agreement. An employer and an employee can come to a mutual agreement that benefits the both of them, and I don't see any need for the government to get in the way of that.
Yeah. I My favorite president was Ronald Reagan. And so I listened to him a lot. And he has said, even before he ran for governor of California, he was repeatedly in saying that everybody runs to the government for help. Government is not the help, government is the problem.
That's right.
And
Correct.
so Reagan certainly believed in limited government, which is why a lot of conservatives that I know are anti-federalists,
Hmm.
because they believe in limited government. Cameron, what are your thoughts on the pitfalls of raising minimum wage? I think probably all three of us have the same fears of that.
Mhm.
But if you could kind of just articulate for us what you think about the minimum wage increase.
I think one of the principal concerns, even with the establishment of this country, was on where are the limitations of federal intrusion? Where are the limitations of state intrusion? Where are there limitations on government intrusion in just the daily lives of people? If you read the Federalist Papers, if you read the different dialogues going back and forth at the time of the founding of both this Commonwealth as well as this constitutional republic that we know of as the United States, these were not easy problems to solve. And so there were many different varying opinions on to what degree should the government be involved on a day-to-day basis. And generally, the consensus of the anti-federalists was that opening the door towards more legislative action and more intrusion of a form of legal authority into your daily lives created a cascading framework where it would perpetuate itself. More intrusion, more involvement, more micromanagement. And this is, again, liberty is a biblical principle. The idea that people can buy and sell as they see fit, the idea that people can exchange in commerce according to a rate that seems reasonable and negotiable. If we allow the government to protrude more and more and more into these varying topics, where does that line end? And that's always been our concern as constitutional conservatives, which is in complete alignment with our faith.
Yeah.
Where do we draw these boundaries? If the government can mandate a $15 an hour, $20 an hour, $25 an hour, there's also nothing to say that the government can't mandate that you hire whoever they choose. If they can set the rates in which you're seeking employment, what's to prevent the government from then instituting policy to determine who you can and cannot employ? We've already seen this play out in other arguments. Even the Little Sisters of the Poor case that came all over national TV about the fact that they wanted to offer health insurance to certain employees, but that health insurance had to meet certain health mandates. Again, this is an area where, well, no, the role of government was just simply to ensure that employees receive due compensation and have good and appropriate options within their healthcare opportunities that this organization was providing, except the fact that a religious institution was now being persecuted because they were failing to meet certain secular requirements instituted by the government. So it's a difficult construct to argue with. It's a very, very challenging argument. And in addition to that, the economic side of it, I mean, if you read Milton Friedman, Thomas Sowell, and many others, they were very clear about the more and more you have bureaucrats who are not involved in day-to-day commerce. Why? Because it's a conflict of interest if they were, but the more and more bureaucrats you put either in Washington or in Richmond to be involved in the daily lives of some of these exchanges of commerce and goods, the more and more protracted and the more you allow lobbying and special interests to then intrude into these spaces and have influence. What many lobbying organizations have sought to do, not all, but there's some, is engage in marketplace capture. Everyone wants a competitive advantage. our competitive advantage is we want people to be able to live freely so that the gospel can thrive here in this country and people can live according to the principles and precepts of God, like James Madison argued. This is an area where it erodes some of that framework, and that's my concern. Is there a biblical argument as to why this is unjust? No, I'm not sure you could make that argument. But is this a dangerous direction to go down, whereby you are absconding more individual liberty to a set of authority which are highly malleable, extremely impressionable, and under the significant influence of special powers? Anyone that's looking for an institution to say, you know, what's the one organization that's just, no matter what, they're able to stand up against corruption? It ain't politicians. They're some of the worst. So again, this is my framework and argument for this is it is not easy for me to justify what are the positive outcomes other than a unique family in a unique circumstance might personally profit more. But again, we have to contend with this. You pay more for labor, the cost of production is going to go up. Therefore, the cost of purchasing commodities will go up. That has second and third order effects throughout our economy that are quite significant.
Yeah. I spoke with someone the other day. This kind of, and this was before I read this bill. I figured that Delegate Ward was going to bring it back because one thing that I've learned very quickly about liberals is they don't have a whole lot of original thoughts, and they usually repeat themselves until they get what they want. So
This
I
is
figured
true.
I figured she was going to bring this back. You know, it's like the baby that keeps putting his hand in the cookie jar, and until he keeps trying until he finally gets a cookie. But so I figured she was going to bring this back. But even before she officially reintroduced this, I was speaking to someone the other day who had put in an online order at the local McDonald's in their neighborhood, and I think they told me that they ordered get this, an Egg McMuffin and a large coffee, $12 for an Egg McMuffin and a large coffee. Well, they canceled the
Yeah.
order. They said there's no way in the world you can't make an Egg McMuffin. I'm sorry, McDonald's. You can't make an Egg McMuffin taste good enough to want to pay $12 for it.
Right.
And but it's like you guys are saying. I believe that that's probably going to be even worse because you raise pay, you raise operational costs, you raise prices, and the people that it's meant to help, it's really going to hurt. Just like Governor Youngkin had written in his veto, because what difference does it make if I'm making $10 an hour, $12 an hour, and I'm working 30 hours a week, but I'm making $15 an hour, and because
That's
it's
right.
hurting my boss, he's cut me to 10 hours a week.
Right.
So
Well, there's another factor in this too,
Exactly.
Michael. Yeah, there's another consideration as well. Those who are lower on the socioeconomic status will be significantly and disproportionately impacted by this more. You talk about a key group of individuals, those making, let's say, $400,000 a year or above. The disposable and revolving income that they're used to, therefore used for mundane purchases like coffee, like an Egg McMuffin, like some of those eating out at restaurants, they have a greater percentage of their disposable income, which can be used for what would be considered either comfort or luxury based items in procurement purchases. Whereas those on the lower socioeconomic scale, their energy costs percentage wise of their revolving income is much higher. So therefore, they have less disposable income to expend on commodities and on products. And now you've taken a product that just a couple of years ago, it might have been $8. Now it's $11. Maybe in 2 years from now, it's $12, $13. You're having a significantly higher degree of impact on those in the lower socioeconomic scale versus those of the upper echelons of leadership and those who have made significant improvements to their lifestyle and make quite exorbitant, salaries and benefits. An 11 to a $15 shift isn't a significant margin for them because you're dealing with a substantial portion of their income which is already disposable and they've invested wisely and they have other reasons for accumulating wealth. Whereas those that are struggling economically, Christ always talks about the poor will always be among you.
yes.
There will always be a circumstance in this human condition on this earth until Christ reigns and comes again in the flesh and embodies his kingdom. Until that occurs, until we have a rebirth of the earth and the return of our Messiah, there will always be the poor on the earth.
Yeah.
So therefore, we're setting conditions through a decision that will disproportionately affect them in a negative way. That is another consideration that has to be contended with.
Yes, yes. Let me play the devil's advocate a little bit, or not really devil's advocate, but let me be a little. Let me just ask you this question: do you think that the left uh, is this a political ploy for them? In other words, it's just they're political pundits. They're just doing these because it thinks it's going to win them the support of the people. Therefore, it's going to win them votes.
I'll let you answer that first, baby.
Well, in some ways, I do think it is. I don't know how to say this any other way than only very simple-minded people that haven't thought about the second and third order effects of this legislation would support it. Because like Cameron said, it immediately is going to drive up the cost for every single person. And everybody who wants that Egg McMuffin, at a certain point, you just decide you don't want that Egg McMuffin anymore. So not only are you not getting your Egg McMuffin, the business isn't getting paid. So I don't know exactly who comes up with these ideas and thinking that it helps anybody, because it, like you said, Michael, even the employee that is suddenly getting a pay raise, well, their hours are going to get cut. So their take-home pay probably isn't going to really change. They're just working less. They have less opportunities, and so it harms the employee, it harms the employer, it harms the consumer. So I don't really know what the long-term gain is for Democrats, but it certainly seems like they think it gets them some cheap points and maybe in the minds of some simple voters that aren't looking too deep into things, it does.
Additionally, I think you don't see a lot of legislators that are employing a large scale number of minimum wage earners. You see a lot of entrepreneurs, you see a lot of individuals that are involved in business, or they're government employees, state employees, you name it. There's quite a few actually state employees that are now in office, which is ironic. But having said that, you have very, very few legislators that will feel this personally through their own investments, through their own businesses, because they're not employing a minimum wage earner. They're not employing 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 kitchen cleaners or cooks or chefs or servers in a restaurant, and they're going to feel the immediate effect overnight with a piece of legislation like this. Instead, many of them work in corporate jobs. A significant number of the individuals that are being sworn in with Karen's class were working in financial management and accounting. They're auditing. These are high-paying salaries. These are high-paying jobs at esteemed firms where, again, whether or not there's a minimum wage is almost irrelevant to their livelihood because it doesn't affect their personal business in form of commerce. That's another problem here, which is why we were so fortunate in the older days of this country, even in the Commonwealth as well as in the foundation of this country. Many of our founders employed simple people that did basic trades work, and so they were huge employers, and so they had a personal skin in the game of enacting certain policy that affected the economic interest of the United States, directly affected them in a very unique and real way. We don't see that same kind of legislator now. So I almost think that many legislators today, there's just really not an association of the impact of what this will do.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's almost like they're making laws or attempting to make laws, but they have absolutely no idea what it is like to live with the people of whom those laws are going to affect. I think that's,
Yeah,
Mhm.
if I were to sum up, Cameron, what you and Karen were just saying,
right.
Delegate Ward has absolutely, and I don't know her personal financial situation, but my guess would be, especially going with the people that are being sworn in January
Mhm.
as the new people. I would probably say that the people that would support this bill have absolutely no idea what it's like to actually have to live under the recipient as a recipient of this minimum
Mhm.
wage, or as one who has to pay out a minimum wage increase.
I
Um,
agree.
and so a lot of legislation. I remember when I used to work in the corporate world, I worked for Ford Motor Company for 25 years almost. And a lot of decisions that were made uh, in Ford were made by people sitting up in the 24th floor who had absolutely no idea of how their policies they made on the 24th floor impacted those people that were working on the 8th floor.
Mhm.
Certainly didn't know what kind of impact it had on the people that worked in the dealerships themselves. Um, my producer works for a company, and to protect the guilty, I won't say either one of their names, but And he's feeling that right now. You have corporate making decisions,
Mhm.
having no idea how it affects the people that work in the stores that work for them. And that's the way it is with the legislation. Because I see legislation I see government as having two purposes: to protect those who do well and punish those who do bad. And
Exactly.
to me, I'm a small government guy like you two are,
Mhm.
and I believe that the biblical limit of government is protection. Protect those who do well and punish those who do bad.
Mhm.
And I don't think the government needs to be involved in our health care. I mean, guys, I don't trust the federal government to get a letter across the state, much less handle my health care. But I don't
Right.
think that they should be involved in our health care. I don't think they should be involved in pay raises or anything having to do with private business.
Yeah.
Now, if
But
it's
they
now,
handled COVID so well,
oh
Michael. They
yeah,
handled COVID so
absolutely,
well.
absolutely. If there's one thing we learned about COVID, man, the Democrats really know what they're doing. And so just give us a shot. We'll
That's
handle
right.
everything for you.
That's right.
It's just like the British said to the colonials, give us your guns. We'll talk about that in a minute. Give us your guns. We'll keep them for you. We'll protect them for you. And an
Right.
unarmed people is an enslaved people.
Mhm.
So I think we're both in full agreement. I think that probably everybody that would watch this broadcast would be in full agreement, which this is bad, bad legislation. And
Yeah.
do you guys agree with that is really the purpose of government, to protect those who do well and punish those who do bad?
Absolutely. I think the Bible clearly articulates that, and we've gotten so far away from that to where we're actually protecting the guilty and serving up the innocent on a platter. And so we've become a very wicked government in my mind.
It's amazing how the same party that is calling for gun control is the same party that's all too happy to release violent felons back on the street.
Mhm.
That's right.
Yeah,
Yep.
the main purpose of our government institution is to ensure that it upholds our rights so that we can live in peace.
Yeah. Yeah,
That's it.
absolutely. Absolutely. All right, well, moving on to the next segment, we're doing good on time. So moving on to our next segment, I want to talk about reproduction rights. And this is kind of, I know, Cameron, that you and Karen have probably spent an innumerable amount of time discussing this amongst yourselves, as my wife and I have done as well.
Mhm.
And this is, of course, a bill that was passed in the legislative session in 2025, and
Mhm.
this is a constitutional amendment. Let me just to give clarification to those who are watching. According to Article 12, Section 1 of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia, in order for something to be changed in the Constitution, it has to go through two legislative sessions, being passed by both bodies of the General Assembly, with an election in the middle of those two sessions. This piece of legislation passed in the General Assembly of 2025. We have had an intervening election this past November, and so therefore it's being brought back into the session in 2026 so that it can go on a referendum for the citizens of the Commonwealth to vote as a constitutional amendment. Delegate-elect Hamilton, give us your perspective on this. I know you've read the amendment,
Mhm.
or the resolution, not an amendment yet, but give us your perspective and the thing for you that is the most abhorrent about this resolution. I know there's probably more than one thing, but if there's a couple of things about it that are the most abhorrent, please feel free to uh,
Sure.
be verbose on that.
Sure. Well, it's such a broad resolution, just the term reproductive freedom can encompass so much more than just abortion. So we have to be concerned about gender change surgeries for minors, because there is no parental consent clause within the resolution, and so all of the trans surgeries that we've been seeing children undergo, those could be protected. And then, of course, we saw just in the recent months, Northern Virginia school had, they called it the secret abortion scandal. Two minors were taken to get an abortion by school faculty. And so, under this resolution, that would be totally legal, which is terrifying. But I think the thing that concerns me the most is that, up to, I believe it's 95% of all abortions are done basically for convenience. And what I mean by that is that the life of the mother is not at risk. There's no rape or incest, and so it's just an act of, I don't want this baby for whatever reason. Either they feel they can't afford it, or they're afraid, or it's just inconvenient for some reason or another. And so um, we know that science is so developed now that we have all this understanding of the development of children. And so we know at 6 weeks a baby has a heartbeat, and we know at 20 weeks a baby can feel pain, and the age of viability is getting lower and lower and lower. So now, a baby at 24 weeks could possibly be saved. And so um, but for some reason, Democrats don't want to give any of those babies a chance. They want babies, even in the birth canal, could be aborted, and so there's no restrictions. There's no protection for life, and that's what concerns me the most. This is just an unreasonable resolution, even for people who believe there should be some choice, or some option for cases of rape and incest, which is, it's not my opinion. But even for that argument, this goes far past that. And I think most reasonable people, if they had an understanding, it would not sit well with them. So I think the most important thing we need to do is message well on this amendment and really wake up people, particularly the church.
Yeah, when I was doing rallies during the election cycle last summer through the fall, early fall, actually spring through the early fall, one of the things, Delegate-elect Hamilton, that I was hearing consistently from conservative delegates and other legislators is that, well, Michael, we're just not going to talk about it. We don't want to talk about abortion. We don't want that to be part of our campaign. And I was trying to encourage them that, all right, I'll agree it doesn't need to be the only thing that you talk about,
Mhm.
but this resolution is so extreme,
Mhm.
and we can't depend on the left to tell us the truth. And if they're the only ones talking, then that's the only information that the voters have, is what the people that are lying are saying about it.
That's
And
right.
ironically enough, Delegate, the incumbents that told me that they didn't want to talk about it, they lost
Mhm.
their reelection.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that that was totally it, but we needed to paint the left as radical and extreme as this
Mhm.
resolution says. It's like you said, it's not only about abortion itself; it's about gender transitioning,
Mhm.
and all of those things. And what's ironic is Jennifer Boysko, Senator Jennifer Boysko, who's the patron of the Senate side bill. I was just notified by a friend of mine down in Virginia Beach that, again, is another piece of legislation that she brought last year that she's already said she's going to brought this year, that she's going to bring back this year. She patroned a bill that would make abortion part of our Constitution, but then she wants to introduce a piece of legislation that is going to protect baby giraffes. That is absolute. I bet when this friend of mine sent me this, I showed my wife, and we both fell off of our chair just about,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
here you're going to pass legislation because my body, my choice, and of course, the three of us could argue that, and soundly argue
Mhm.
that and defeat any of those arguments, but to make a piece of legislation, my body, my choice, and then in the same session to patron a piece of legislation that's going to care more for a wildlife animal that was not, quite honestly, created in the image of God,
Mhm.
to protect them, but not protect the innocent in the womb. And let's be real, for
Yeah.
the sole purposes of convenience. It's
Right.
like you said, Delegate, this resolution is not about rape, incest, or the health of the mother.
No.
That's the argument that they want to make in session, but that's not really what this is about, because it goes
Mhm.
well beyond that. If you want to talk about rape, incest, and health of the mother, I'll be happy to talk to you about that.
Yep.
I'm like you. I'm 100% pro-life. I'm
Mhm.
100%. I'm against abortion in every case, for any case,
Mhm.
for any reason. Health of the mother, I don't. I've talked to so many doctors there is not a medical reason today that would require a woman to abort her child to save her life.
Correct.
Dr. Dennis Petroselli testifies with me down at the General Assembly, and he's told me repeatedly. He says, Michael, if the health of the mother is such an emergency, he says it takes 3 days to dilate the cervix of a mother for an abortion, but it takes about 20 minutes to do a C-section.
That's
So
right.
which one is the most viable and which one is the most life-saving procedure? So it's not even about that.
Right.
It's about convenience. Not over 95.9% of abortions are for birth control,
Hmm.
and that's so important. But Cameron, I'm gonna have you talk about the same thing, get your perspective on it. But I want to read portions for our audience. I want to read portions of the amendment that said the Commonwealth and it shall not penalize, prosecute, or otherwise take adverse action against any individual for aiding or assisting another individual in exercising such other individual's rights in reproductive freedom with such other individual's voluntary consent. Does that mean, Cameron, that you could hire a Roto-Rooter to help you perform an abortion and there'd be no law to prosecute Mr. Roto-Rooter?
Well, the interpretation of law is subject to many different legal opinions, but I would say the case is made that the door is open much wider than the average person would really reasonably consider. And so that's always been my concern here is where does this stop? And how are these limitations well defined? Specifically, this legislation is lawless, and it is a representation of the lack of value of human life.
Mhm.
And that's the way I would say this. And one of my greatest concerns, Michael, because you could even clean up this language, narrow it down, and say, okay, look, you might find a couple of reasonable Democrats that said, hey, look, maybe that language is a little bit extreme. Maybe let's dial it in a little tighter here or there. At the end of the day, none of that is solving the greater narrative of this is a bill which promotes the devaluation of human life. It's that simple. It is simply that simple, and I will never support it. We have a crisis here in our culture, specifically amongst constitutional Christian conservatives, but also in the church. You know, even when I ran in my primary, Karen and I were talking about this earlier today, actually. It was astonishing to see how many conservatives are walking and retreating away from their virtues, which, granted, on the campaign trail, you represent that you're a person of faith, you know, man or woman of faith, you're a Christian,
Sure.
you believe firmly in the precepts and teachings of the Bible and the scripture. If that's the case, then these are immutable characteristics that essentially you can't soften. These are defining of your very character. And yet we see conservatives time and time again mute, modify, or pacify and limit their perspective depending on the audience.
Mhm.
It's one thing to use tact, and I understand being tactful for a given audience so as to be received properly. And Paul even talks about this. To the Jew, I became as a Jew. To the Gentile, I became as a Gentile. The idea that you need to know your audience and convey a given message. Paul writes many times using the principles and or the reasoning of some of the pagan world because it's understood. It's understood to them not because he sees virtue in it, because he's trying to relate in a manner that the audience understands fully the gravity of what he's trying to convey. I can see that argument. But I have seen so many Christians, and so has my wife, and so have you, who, when push comes to shove, they lack the courage to defend their convictions when it becomes unpopular or uncomfortable.
Yeah.
This is an ultimate litmus test for us. Do we truly value human life? And if so, we should be willing to defend it. It doesn't mean we're browbeating. It doesn't mean we're picketing. It doesn't mean that we're necessarily calling for the execution of people that do this. It does mean that we're unapologetic about what we value. Christ said to pick up your cross and follow me. So therefore, it is prudent that we at least advocate for the virtues and the doctrine that we believe are upholding precepts that God ordained this universe by. So he created man and woman, called them good. Granted, we have a sinful nature, but the fact is we are created, as you said, in the image of God. And we need to come to grips with the fact that we have a messaging crisis about we don't value human life. This is why we oppose slavery, because you had Americans of particular groups, many of which were of African descent, but there were other non-African slaves as well in the United States that ultimately their rights were being deprived. And the Civil War, which granted was fought for a variety of reasons, ultimately upheld the opinion that they were due rights, and that Frederick Douglass wrote about the truth and the hope and promise of the Constitution should be fulfilled upon all people, not just for specific people. And so we need to be willing to go into difficult scenarios, use some better tact, but still defend our virtues. If we don't do this, if we're inconsistent, well, why didn't you defend your principle here? Well, it was uncomfortable. The audience I was around wouldn't have received it well. So what you've told me is that it's an idea, it's something that you like and appreciate and you favor, but it's not really a conviction. It's not really something that you're willing to assume injury or loss over. And that's the problem. I think Christians, especially constitutional conservative Christians, need to really come to grips with, what are we willing to defend? Where are we willing to draw the line? It doesn't mean, again, that we're taking up the sword and declaring a crusade, but it does mean very clearly, if we can't represent the opinions that we hold dearly to, that we believe our Maker upholds, if we can't defend those actions, then we really have no hope. Paul writes about, I press on for the mark of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. Not that I have yet attained it. The argument there is we're constantly striving to model ourselves after God, after Christ. If we can't defend those, Christ was being persecuted, never once relented from his speech. In fact, he forgave those who persecuted him, but nonetheless stood up to Pontius Pilate and many others and proclaimed the truth. Arguably, and even when he's praying in the Garden of Gethsemane, may your will be done and not my own. The idea was that truth was paramount and that there was a given time and a purpose. And so I just think we need to reframe this whole argument. We are the party, we are the people that value human life, not because of my opinion, your opinion, my wife's opinion, but because of our Creator's opinion.
Yeah.
How do we know we love him? We obey him.
Yes.
And so
Amen.
I think that's a way that we have to frame this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The question of life and the beginning of life, for me, ends when Jesus told Jeremiah, before you were in the womb, I knew you. And I had ordained you. So not only did God tell Jeremiah that he knew about him, but he'd already had a purpose in his life. And so every person that is created by God in the womb, at the moment that the cell from the mother meets the cell of the father and that bright light flashes, that is the beginning of life, and it needs to be protected. It's separate DNA, it's separate cells, it's a separate body. People say, well, it's just a clump of cells. Well, the three of us are just a clump of cells.
Yeah, exactly.
The division of the cells begin immediately, and life is there. And I was in a friendly debate with a pro-choice person the other day, and they said, well, it said, Dr. Huffman, if we don't have abortion rights, what if I just happen to get pregnant? I was like, what do you mean if you happen to get pregnant? But this isn't like catching COVID.
Right.
I mean, you just don't happen to get pregnant. How about having responsibility for your actions?
That's
You
right.
play certain games, you win certain prizes. And if you're going to play house, and don't be surprised when a child is the result of playing house. And I don't mean that to be hard, but if you have created a life, whether through sinful means or even within the bonds of marriage, which is the only time that type of activity should be taking place biblically anyway. But whichever it is, that is a life that was uniquely created by God in the womb of his or her mother, and needs to be afforded the protection of anybody else. We can make it's odd, it's ironic that we can make moral statements about children outside the womb, but they're unwilling to make moral statements about children inside the womb, even though it's a separate body, separate DNA, separate heart, separate brain, separate cell system. Everything about it is different.
Right.
And it's just
But Michael, you touched on such a great point there too. The book of Joel is so clear. Return to me, the Lord your God, with fasting, mourning, and weeping. For I am gracious and compassionate and abounding in love and relent from sending calamity. we have the solution. So when people do, step outside what they believe, what we believe is acceptable behavior, you engage in sinful activity, you've wronged another individual.
Yes.
And many times we kind of dispel the doctrine of the past when Israel was being formed as a nation at the base of Mount Sinai, eye for an eye logic. It wasn't just about, oh, you gouged my eye out, therefore I'm going to gouge your eye out. That wasn't the point. It was about understanding how to make people whole if you've harmed them, if you've wronged them in another. And so, but there is a pathway and a gateway to have reconciliation with our Creator. The beautiful thing about our faith, it is the only faith that really and truly is continually represented by the outpouring of love and abundance of our Creator, who wants to seek reconciliation with us despite our iniquities. It's totally unlike any other faith that has ever existed, because it is the truth, the way, the truth, and life. And so in this context, when women are facing the difficulty, we have friends who have felt the social pressures of unmarried, young, promiscuous, engaged in activity that resulted in pregnancy, which we all know what it takes to make a baby. But the pressures put on these young girls were also, you don't want this. It's not fair for you. This is a burden that you're being saddled with. So not only is it the argument that life doesn't have worth, but that in fact it's selfish, or it is unfair and unjust to think that this life has value, rather than to show these women there are other options. You don't have to harm yourself. You don't have to harm this child. There are so this is where we want to uphold justice and uphold the law, and to make sure people understand if you engage in certain activities, there's going to be certain consequences that are less than ideal. So avoid that. But when you do step outside the boundaries of acceptable behavior, the main focus should be, how do I find reconciliation with my Maker? How do I make this whole? And so this is where I do think society and the church needs to really wake up and wrap their arms around some of these very vulnerable women who've experienced sinful behavior and are on the pathway to make it murder, to make it so much worse. And so resulting in the death of an innocent child, which is abhorrent in the sight of our Maker. So you went from bad to worse so quickly. And so the church does need to be very awake, very active, and support crisis pregnancy centers and so many other organizations that are trying to witness the gospel and that are trying to show these women, you're being lied to. There are other options. In fact, there's more support here for you than you may realize. And that's all these groups want to do, is they want to love them, throw their arms around them and say, please don't do this. We'll find a loving home for your child. We will raise this child. We'll help you.
Yes.
There are options, but we have to push through that noise too. It's not just don't let them engage in abortions, but also we have to support these women that have made mistakes, that will continue to unfortunately make mistakes, and to show them that there's a better path.
Yeah, I think if you'll allow me just for a second, I just want to dovetail off of what Cameron's saying. I think one of the reasons why this is so difficult, even in the church, for pastors to address head on, is because 1 in 4 women at this point have had an abortion, and Satan is doing a number on these women as far as shame is concerned, and women that have not come to the Lord and just fully repented and experienced that freedom. I think they're feeling a tendency to want to almost protect themselves and not speak out against abortion, because they have to come to grips with what choice they have made that they don't feel at peace with. So I think, I've heard some powerful testimonies from women who have made that mistake, but they have come to know the Lord, and God has just redeemed even that mistake in their life and given them a beautiful testimony. And as we see more and more women do that and stand up and courage, we're going to see this stronghold break over our nation. I really, truly believe that. And one of the scriptures, I believe it's Revelation 12:11, it says, we overcome Satan by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. And as people release that testimony and the work that God has done in their lives, we're going to see this, spirit of, it's basically a self-worship, it's a sacrifice to the altar of self. This abortion is, and I think we're going to see it shattered eventually. That's my true desire.
Amen.
We go to church with a woman who has a child from an unwed relationship. And so then she's now married and she's got a beautiful family now. But they're dear friends of ours. And seeing her daughter, who's older in age, it is just unconscionable to think that young girl who's I think she's a teenager now. It's unconscionable to think that young girl doesn't have value and worth in the sight of our Maker. You see that the girl that she is now, and the life that she has, and the love from her parents. I mean, it is astonishing to think that the pressures this woman, her mother, felt as a younger girl, basically in or fresh out of high school, were so extreme. And if she had succumbed to those wills, she would have terminated her child, but she hasn't.
Yeah.
And now she has a teenage daughter who is beautiful, who's growing in faith, and who's able to live a productive life, and really can be an example of something which could have utterly ripped her soul apart, and now is something that creates more beauty and magnifies the power and impact of our Lord and Savior.
Yeah.
Amen. Amen. I preached a sermon in one of the churches I was in the Commonwealth some months ago, and I gave an illustration of, I'm not going to go into it on this, it would take too much time, but gave an illustration of three different children that were operated on inside the womb of their mother. One was heart surgery, and one was brain surgery. And basically, I said this: if we can do, and I went through all the medical terminology with it, went through all the procedures and everything, and the people were absolutely astonished. But I ended with this: I said, if we can operate, and you guys have heard this because you were at the same conference I was.
That's right. That's right.
If we can operate on a baby inside the womb of a mother, that baby is a patient. And a patient is a person, no matter how small they are.
That's right.
That's right.
And there's a reason why when a woman has surgery on her unborn child, there are two anesthesiologists that go into that operating room, one for the mother and one for the child. But one of the criticisms that I hear a lot, and Cameron, you both touched on this really, but one of the criticisms I hear a lot from the pro-choice people about us pro-life people, that a lot of times is the case, is you guys want to lobby for life, but you don't want to do anything to help that life once it's in the world. And a lot of times that's it. And so a lot of times that's true. And so I think that, Cameron, as you said, I think the particularly Christians need to be mindful that we not only preach, but it goes back to the old adage, we also practice it. That if we are going to preach a message of life from the moment of conception, then the church needs to step up and help in those cases as well. But I remember right now I'm going back listening to the testimonies of the patrons from last session so that I can formulate my arguments that I will make this coming session. But I remember when Jennifer Boysko gave her synopsis, or gave her overview, or gave her reasoning for this bill. If you go back to last session and you look at it, it's pretty it's almost funny, but if it's not so serious, it would be. She said that ever since this Dobbs decision came down, the Supreme Court decision that happened in 2022, where it reversed Roe v. Wade, she said ever since the Dobbs decision in 2022, women have had their fundamental right of an abortion taken away from them. Well, I answered that to her in a private meeting and said, first of all, Senator, there's nothing in the Constitution or any founding document or any present law that says a woman has a constitutional right to an abortion.
That's right.
Even Roe v. Wade wasn't our Constitution.
Right.
So nowhere does a woman have a constitutional fundamental right to an abortion. So that's the first lie. I don't think, and I was pretty blunt with her. I said, I don't think this is an error on your part. That's the first lie. The second lie is that it took away the right of a woman to have an abortion. I said, that's also a lie. I said, all it did was what the founding fathers said that it should do. And that's if you read the 10th Amendment, and that sends it back to the states. And it should be a state decision. Government shouldn't be involved in it at all, because we need to have a moral. Of course, John Adams said that the Constitution is only made for moral and religious people, and is woefully unable to govern anything other than that. But be that as it may, what it did was not take away anything, but send it back to the states. And that's exactly what the 10th Amendment of the Constitution of the United States said. that whatever the federal government doesn't order, the states can regulate, and the people of those states can regulate. I want to give you guys another quote, and we got about 30 seconds on this segment. We're with the delegate-elect Hamilton, Karen Hamilton from the Virginia 62nd District, and her husband, Cameron Hamilton. Both of these folks, as you have well been able to tell already, are very versed in law, very versed in the Constitution, very versed in biblical principles and what's right. But I want to give you guys another quote from the resolution in the 30 seconds we've got left. For the purposes of this section, a state interest is compelling only if it is for the limited purpose of maintaining or improving the health of an individual seeking care. That's ironic to me because the baby is not the one seeking care.
Correct.
The woman trying to abort the baby is the one that's seeking care. And of course, it seems like to me that the only thing they're interested in is no matter what, we're going to give this woman the choice of doing whatever she wants to do. Give us your thoughts in 15 seconds.
Yeah, I think in order for it to be in the interest of the patient receiving care, you would have to say that you would have to say that 95% of abortions that are done for convenience are more or less done for the emotional health or because of fear. That basically means that she has any excuse and a doctor will sign off and call that, well, the mental health is at risk. That's kind of how you would have to justify that, which is zero protection for the baby once again. So
Cameron, anything you want to add to that, or anything you want to add to that segment?
I think she said it very well. I think this is just a ploy on emotional instability of our time. We live in a hyper selfish culture that is unable to see beyond our own immediate needs in many respects. And I think that's what I think abortion is simply an extreme representation of that in a very unique field of our lives, where women are, they're fully empowered to believe that they are the most important things in the world. And look, every life has worth and value in the sight of our Maker. But again, our Maker wants us to abhor lawlessness and abhor what is evil. So I think that we have a real crisis on our hands.
Nick Freitas told me some weeks ago, he said, Michael, he said, Planned Parenthood wants to say that they offer all these kinds of healthcare, mammograms and contraception and all these things. He says, but over 97, right at 97% of their services are abortion services. He says, so it's like you go to McDonald's, and I'm not picking on McDonald's tonight. It's just the last restaurant I passed coming into the studio tonight. So I'm just thinking about McDonald's. I haven't eaten there forever, but I'm just thinking about McDonald's. He says, it's like you go to McDonald's. He says, you get fries, you get a sundae, you get a Coke, but you really went there for the burger. He's the same way with Planned Parenthood. You might get a mammogram, you might get contraception, but what you really went for was the abortion. And that's true.
Mhm.
I think I read yesterday where they've had to close, and I rejoice in this Planned Parenthood because of the cuts to federal funding has had to close another 40 or 50 abortion clinics across the country because of a loss of federal funding. And so we're looking forward to that number getting even higher. Well, again, this is the We the People podcast with Dr. Michael Huffman, sponsored or produced by the Virginia Assembly of Independent Baptists. And I am in the studio of the Fair Catch podcast. The Fair Catch podcast is a podcast put on by two exceptional young men. They just happen to be also my sons, but they're exceptional young men who are deep into sports. And so you can catch their podcast on Spotify, Google Podcast, or Apple Podcast on Tuesdays or Wednesdays, when I think they record on Tuesdays and it's up by Wednesday on those three platforms. It's the We the People podcast. That's me. It's a Fair Catch podcast with Zachary and Kevin, and we appreciate them letting us use their studio each week for our discussions. But again, I'm with Delegate-elect Karen Hamilton from Virginia's 62nd District and her husband, Cameron And thank you again for coming on. I want to move on to the next segment on HJ3, which was the marriage issue that's been introduced. That was not last year's number. That's this year's number. I think last year was HJ9, but this year it's been the third piece of resolution that's been introduced. And if you read the introduction to the bill, it mentions Obergefell v. Hodges as the platform of this piece of legislation, this resolution. And basically, I have spoken with Adam Eben, who is the Senate patron, and also Don Sickles, who is the House patron of this resolution. And they both have affirmed to me that our Constitution 15-A, the Constitution of Virginia, is unconstitutional because of the Supreme Court decision. Well, one of the things that amazes me, guys, as I sit in session is the lack of care by the left of what the Constitution says. They want to quote the Constitution when it's convenient, but you don't have to sit in session long, or you don't have to sit in committee, or even sit in their office long before you realize, well, the Constitution doesn't really matter. That's not really the issue. That at times is a convenient exit, the convenient segue, convenient excuse. But at the end of the day, for us, for them, the Constitution doesn't really matter, because to say that our Constitution is unconstitutional because of Obergefell back in 2015, well, even if, and I'm gonna be as nice as I can, okay? I mean, Karen, you guys know that I'm a nice guy. At least I try to be. But I'm gonna be as nice and blunt as I can. My producer's shaking his head no that I'm not a nice guy. But like he knows anything.
Only the people that know you, Michael.
Only the people that know me. I guess. If he keeps shaking his head no, I'm gonna cut his pay. Anyway, it's a good thing you don't have a microphone, or he'd chime in on that. But even if I were to say, okay, Obergefell makes our Constitution unconstitutional, the problem is that Obergefell v. Hodges in 2015 didn't change the nation's Constitution. It was an unconstitutional mandate by a bunch of liberal justices, 5-4 split decision in the United States Supreme Court, based on an opinion of the left. And again, I go back to the 10th Amendment that says, and I told Adam and Don this, I said, guys, listen, I said, there's a thing in law called jurisdiction. And one of the questions that you always have to ask yourself when you have courts that make these decisions, did they have jurisdiction to make these decisions? And in Obergefell v. Hodges, the Supreme Court of the United States did not have jurisdiction to make such a mandate, because the 10th Amendment says they don't. Again, as we spoke about with the other amendment, this amendment, this issue goes back to the states. He said, well, and they said, well, that's what we're trying to do. Yeah, but you're trying to do it based upon an unconstitutional decision. If you want to talk about a issue that's unconstitutional and is indefensible, that is what the Supreme Court in 2015 basically said. And trying to make same-sex marriage, mandate same-sex marriage for every state in the United States. And legally and constitutionally, Supreme Court didn't have that power. And I even had a couple of liberals look at me and say, well, do you think that you're smarter than the Supreme Court justices? I was like, no, I'm not saying that I'm smarter than 4 of them. I'm smarter than 5 of them. And I've got the legal opinion of the other 4 that agree with me. Even John Roberts, where you never really know where he's going to come down, he even sided with us on that regard. Yeah. But you know, try to make this a state issue based upon that, an unconstitutional. And again, the Supreme Court justices argued the 14th Amendment. If you go back and read what John Bingham in 1868, who was the patron or the author of the 14th Amendment, he said that the 14th Amendment that the Congress is considering and that the people will have to vote on is to protect the Bill of Rights. Quote, it hath that extent and no more, end quote.
Mm.
And of course, this was during the Reconstruction era after the Civil War. They were trying to make sure that newly freed slaves were receiving equal protection under the law, which
Mhm.
has to do with the Equal Protection Clause and the Due Process Clause of those amendments. But interpret those to be marriage is absolutely a stretch constitutional. But Cameron, I want to ask you a question. Uh, does the founding documents actually say or even make the assumption? Now, I love being married. I've been married for 32 years, and I know you love being married. But does the founding documents actually say or even make an assumption that, quote, and I'm quoting from the resolution here, marriage is one of the vital personal rights essential to the orderly pursuit of happiness? Does any of our founding documents even allude to that?
No, no, to put it bluntly.
Yeah.
It does not. It's assumed. Again, you looking at Charlie Kirk actually said this so well when he would speak on campuses and different forums. But at the time of the founding of our country, and also even during many different critical periods of our nation's history, many of our legislators at the state and federal level were still outspoken constitutional. Uh, they were constitutionalists, but they were also Christians. They were also men and women of faith. And so at the time, it was understood that that was an inherently religious matter. The idea was not so much to pull religion out of everyday life with the separation of church and state and many other things. It was the idea that the state had to uphold religious liberty. Marriage was always defined as a union before the living God between a man and a woman, and in no way was the jurisdiction of marriage meant to be absconded to the state or to the federal government. Which is why this has been a difficult argument in so many different places, because Christians have felt it's their responsibility to defend the title marriage. If the state wants to issue an opinion on civil unions, again, we can constitutionally argue about that all day long, but at least it doesn't retain an inherently biblical word and narrative of marriage. And so, in my understanding and in my reading, I've never seen where marriage is supposed to be a guaranteed and protected right. It is a common occurrence. It is a good practice. It's recommended in our scripture. Again, the first command that Adam and Eve received upon the discharge from the Garden of Good and Evil, or from the Garden of Eden, when mankind falls into sin, is be fruitful and multiply the earth, fill it with faithfulness, and cultivate a good life.
Yeah.
The idea there is marry, procreate, fill the earth with abundance, and praise the living God in all that you do. And I think that that's the problem. We've introduced government into inherent areas where our faith and our religious practice really should be governing those things, not government.
Yeah. It's another one of those government overreaches that, like you said so well, Cameron, the government should have no say so in the marriage. Because even though the founding fathers wrote a lot about marriage personally, they wrote nothing. I'm like you, Cameron. I've read extensively. They wrote nothing about marriage in any founding document that would ever give us the illusion that marriage is that is essential to the orderly pursuit of happiness. I know a lot of people that are happy that aren't married.
There were states that passed laws in the past which would actually ban the intermarriage of different ethnicities and different, genetic origins. Again, I mean, an absurdly unconstitutional practice. The idea that through law, if you were of one minority group, you couldn't marry another minority group solely because of your genetic origins. I mean, it's just unconscionable to think but again, that was an argument whereby the state had jurisdiction into marriage and was able to define the terms and conditions of it.
Yeah.
That is an incredibly unprincipled and unintelligent argument to present. The same thing goes here. The state now all of a sudden is setting terms and conditions of marriage, and in fact can actually punish churches if they refuse to honor it. I mean, how did we get this far? The state has now become our religious head, and that is never what it was intended to be.
Right. Exactly. I've actually, I think that one of the things that as far back as I can remember my legal studies, I think we actually started this ball rolling in 1967 with the decision of Virginia v. Loving that overturned the law that says that you cannot interracial marry anyone. We kind of started this ball rolling because, like you said, Cameron, once the state gets involved, once the door is cracked open, then there's no shutting it. It just the left, the liberals just open it wider and wider and wider. Delegate-elect Hamilton, explain for the audience what Cameron alluded to this, what the religious liberty exclusion does to us, and also to explain your understanding of the separation of, now it's also the resolution says the lawful marriage between the Commonwealth and its political subdivisions will recognize the legal marriage between two adult persons regardless of race, sex, or gender. Now, race, that's just ridiculous. Nobody's trying to overturn that. That's just crazy. But explain to us the religious liberty exemption that was in the first draft, but was removed as we went through session last year. And of course, by our Constitution, has to be introduced this session with the exact same language that it was passed in the previous session. It can't be changed. So explain to us the exemption of the religious liberty exemption, the extraction of that, and the separation of the sex and genders.
Sure. So because they decided to eliminate that religious liberty exemption, that means that churches are going to be forced to marry unbiblical unions, or they're going to face legal consequences, which could be, well, whatever they decide the punishment's going to be. It could be even imprisonment. In worst case scenario, we're thinking of pastors that could end up in jail for not marrying two men or two women. You get that picture in your head of the people that refused to bake the cake out in Colorado or whatever it was. And eventually they ended up winning that case, but hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees later, so it really penalizes churches and brings them in the crosshairs legally. And it really could set things in motion for religious persecution in my mind that we haven't seen in this country. So it's very concerning. But as far as the distinction that they try to draw between sex and gender, it's just in complete rebellion, not only from biological reality and, biblical reality as well. God saying that he created us male and female. And we just see an undermining of God's truth, a rebellion of God's created order. And so I think one of the things that's concerning about that is it really embeds this gender ideology that's been so harmful for children. It really embeds that language into our Constitution. It opens up the doors for girls to perpetually be put in danger, whether it be in their restrooms or in sports. The party that used to be, all about protecting women and the Me Too and all this stuff, they've quickly turned into a party that endangers women and endangers children.
Yeah. What I go back to is the Virginia Statute for Religious Freedom that was given to us by Thomas Jefferson in 1786. That basically states that the government cannot substantially burden religious organizations. But what they're trying to do, and this is why they're trying to make it part of the Constitution, because as you two well know, Constitution supersedes statute. And so if we can enshrine in our Constitution something that has negated the religious liberty, then the church is woefully in trouble. Because Karen, you brought up the baker, and I'm sure, that state had similar religious liberties in its code as Virginia does. I know he would, and ultimately when he ended up winning, but I'm sure the lack of reputation, and I'm sure he'd love that $125,000 back in legal fees that he had to spend to hold up his constitutional rights. And so if, we do have in Virginia the First Amendment of our Constitution, and then of course the First Amendment of the United States Constitution that does grant us religious liberty. I'll go ahead and let you in on you guys in on a little we are working on an injunction. VAIB is working with some lawyers on an injunction to stop this We're sending letters to the Attorney General. I've got lawyers all over the country working on this with me. I even have some delegates in Richmond working, have called me, asked me to go in with and help them with a piece of legislation that would ensure that this would not pass, that this would be stopped, because if we make an argument for that this removes religious liberty, and if we can find a judge, and by the grace of God, where we can start an injunction, then the law says that while this is being investigated, nothing can be changed. So that's what we're hoping, and I think I'm pretty safe with my audience, letting you guys know what we're doing so that you can pray as far as what we're going to be doing. And so, Delegate Hamilton, you're exactly right on this sex and gender. This opens the door. This is a whole lot more than two guys or two girls marrying each other. This is about protection of our young girls, not allowing biological males in boys and girls bathrooms or in girls locker rooms. And so that's what it's all about. Well, I want to go on. If you have any questions for our guest, you can call in 804-960-4014. Our phones are standing by. You can call in, and we can try to set up something here to take your question. That's 804-960-4014. I'm sorry, did I get the right number there, Mr. Producer? 804-960-4014. Yeah, that's the right number. So if you, I got so many numbers in my brain. Sometimes I give out the wrong phone number. I give out my personal number, and I got some crazy people calling me. But 804-960-4014. If you have a question for me, for Delegate-elect Hamilton or her husband Cameron, we'd love to take that call. We're going to open the phones light up now. If you get a busy signal, if someone doesn't call, please keep calling back, and we will be glad to take your call. But we want to talk about another piece of legislation that is, I haven't decided where VAIB is going to stand on this, but I did want to discuss this with you all, and that is an introduction of a piece of legislation by Michael Feggins actually, I'm sorry, it wasn't Michael Feggins, it was Delegate Jones, HB 7, basically not allowing any law enforcement officers to wear face masks, any kind of face covering during a riot or anything. And it's all based on the protests in 2020 about George Floyd. Now, I sent a video to my producer so that we could play it for our audience, but I could not find a video that did not have vulgarity in it. So I decided it would probably be more apropos not to play it. But this bill is all about the protests in 2020 following the death of George Floyd. The original, it's not a new law. I mean, the original law was given basically, if you look at the history of the law, the law was originally given for the KKK. So they would not be allowed to walk in the streets or ride in the streets with face masks on. But the ironic thing about that is all KKK members were Democrats.
Yeah.
And so when we were, I mean, history, I mean, you can't change history. They would love to, but every KKK member was a Democrat, and every Democrat voted against the abolishing of slavery, and every Republican voted in favor of it. And so you can't change those facts. The accusation is made that during those in Richmond, I like this terminology, peaceful protests,
right,
that the police were using tear gas and rubber bullets and were wearing face masks and were committing torturous acts on those people that were peacefully protesting. Well, the video that I wanted to show, but we decided not to because of the vulgarity in it. Now, the First Amendment does allow for peaceful, not for protest, but peaceable assembly. There's a difference between assembling peaceably and having a protest. Protests are rarely peaceful. But in this video, it showed them defacing Robert E. Lee statue there on Monument Avenue, buses and police cars on fire, and this is in downtown Richmond. But then they want to turn around and call that peaceful, and they want to give the police a hard time for using tear gas and using rubber bullets to calm down the protest, and saying that they can't wear masks anymore. Well, I come from a law enforcement family. My father was a police officer. My oldest son is a member of the SWAT team. I have another son who is a sheriff's deputy. So I come from a police family, and so this hits at the heart of for me, uh, because the bill says that if a police officer wears a face mask and does what they call torturous treatment of the victim, and that torturous treatment, if you look at the bill, it defines torturous treatment as false arrest. So if one of my children or any police officer is wearing a mask, this bill passes, they're wearing a mask, I think it even mentions ninja style masks. If they wear a mask and they make an arrest that turns out to not be a one that can be held up in a court of law, maybe there was reasonable concern to make that arrest, but it could not be held up in a court of law. This bill says they could lose their job. They could be fired. They could not only lose their job, but this bill says they could lose their accreditation as police officers, and then therefore they could never get a job again, or they could go to jail, pay a $2,500 fine, or spend 12 months in jail for this. I want to get your Cameron. Is this government overreach, and to what degree?
I think so. I mean, I think that right now we have law enforcement officers that are dealing with social contagions of this abnormal and abhorrent lawless behavior, and continually the perspective is not to rebuke people that are actually engaging in unlawful activity. Instead, we're criticizing and scrutinizing our members of law enforcement. It's a case example of loving injustice, meanwhile condemning those who pursue a narrative of justice. And of course, there's cops that step afoul and abuse their authorities.
Sure.
We all know that. Every
Sure.
cop will tell you that. But historically, we have not seen overwhelming trends with law enforcement where they're abusing their power to such a significant degree to where we would need some kind of an aggressive reform like this to drive further transparency. I think we're also facing a really difficult age now where cops are getting doxxed. They're getting their faces taken pictures of and using AI technology to find out who they are for the intention and purpose to put their private information public. And these are people that they're displaying their badge. So they've got identifiers that are very clear, and you can look them up. And many of them will tell you their officer name, their badge number, and but because they're wearing a face mask, even if I don't prefer that they would wear a face mask, and again, I don't prefer that these police officers wear face masks. I would rather them not. Having said that, to say that you could punish them solely for wearing a face mask, based upon these reasons and rationale, I can't see a positive side of this. So, Michael, I do have to apologize. I have to depart here. I'm going to leave it to my very capable wife. But thank you, brother. It's been an absolute blessing.
Thanks, Cameron.
God bless you. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Cameron. Thank you for joining us. Delegate-elect Hamilton, is this just the beginning of the modifying of qualified immunity?
I think so. I mean, we've seen many Democrats discuss that they have no issue stripping that, and that's their in-state goal. So we'll see if it leads to that. I was disappointed to see Spanberger get so much support from law enforcement because I believe they were putting the collective bargaining wishes ahead of some of the other more important things like the qualified immunity protections. And so I hope that's not the case, but I do believe we're headed that direction.
Yeah, and for those in our audience who are not familiar with the terminology of qualified immunity gives police officers, if they walk into a situation where they have to lethally handle a situation. I'll give you an example. A guy is holding a hostage at gunpoint and turns on the officer, or is in the process of doing harm to the victim, and the police officer lethally remedies the situation, which is legal for him to do. If he feels that his life is threatened or the life of a hostage is threatened, he can take lethal action to protect himself and to protect that hostage. If qualified immunity were reformed or done away with, that would allow the family of that perpetrator to come back and sue the
Mhm.
police officer for basically doing
Right.
his job. And he or she could basically lose everything
Right.
because they did their job. And what's going to happen? I've had many, many police officers tell me that, Dr. Huffman, if qualified immunity goes away, we will leave law enforcement,
Yep.
and you will see a decrease. And, Delegate elect, maybe that's what the left wants. Maybe they want, because they're not, as they've proven time and time again, they are not the party of law and order. They're not the party of tolerance, and they're not the party of law and order. And so
That's
perhaps
correct.
they want a chaotic society because their party is a party of chaos. And so maybe that
Yeah.
is what they're looking for.
I agree. Yeah. This is the defund the police party. And you see out in leftist cities like Portland, cops totally have their hands tied and, they're just sitting there watching across the street as protesters are throwing, projectiles that could kill people and cops are unable to arrest them for whatever reason. So they've been given a stand down order or whatever. And this is how leftist cities are run. That's how leftist states are starting to be run. And I don't blame police officers for wanting to leave the force because they're not paid that much as it is. They put their life on the line every single day. It's getting increasingly dangerous. They're disrespected constantly. And as far as the face masks go, I mean, I don't know very many people that go to work and get spit on and, get drinks thrown at them or rocks thrown at them. I don't blame them for wanting to cover their face. And the left, up until about a year or so ago, everybody had a mask on and their party, they were all walking around with a COVID mask. So I wonder if they're going to say it's okay for an officer to wear a COVID mask. Because if that's the case, those might make a comeback.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, you and Cameron bring up a good point. One of the points that Cameron brought up was about one of the benefits of being able to cover your face, especially when you're in the line of duty, is if they take a picture of you, they could easily find where you live. I mean, that's
That's right.
getting easier and easier to find out where police officers live by facial recognition. I mean, you've got AI, you've got all these things. Or if you're not interested in finding out where they live, then you could be interested in making their life torturous by using AI technology and the picture you took of them to make them say or do anything that you can create in your own perverted little ungodly mind you would want them to do, and they could absolutely have their lives shattered and ruined just
That's right.
because in the fulfillment of their jobs they were not allowed to wear a face mask. So I think that this, now obviously we should not be making overreach for 3% of police officers when 97% of them are upright and doing their jobs.
That's right.
I have known, and I'm also a chaplain of the local sheriff's department here, and I know many police officers. I know no police officers that are crooked. Now,
Mhm.
do I know some police officers that wouldn't that practice their version of the law maybe a little bit differently than I would maybe interpret it? Perhaps. But I
Mhm.
know no police officers that I would say are crooked, and I know no police officers that I don't trust.
Mhm.
And so that is the vast majority. Now, we're also not naive. We know that there are about 3% of law enforcement officers that are crooked. And I would admit, and I would agree, you need to weed those out. But you don't make overreach laws like this, like Delegate Jones is trying to do,
Mhm.
that are going to hurt the 97% of police officers that are doing their jobs and doing their jobs well.
Correct.
And so we need to be very careful about that. But I want to wrap up things here because I don't want to take the rest. I don't want to take a whole lot of your evening. When I was doing this outline, I was like, this is going to go too long. And so I need to wrap this up. But I wanted just to talk to you real quick about the second look legislation. This is one of the pieces of legislation that, as of right now, has not been introduced. But I've already been told by many members of the House that it will be introduced. They're not sure who's going to patron it yet, but of course, the second look legislation is a piece of legislation that would force, through legislative action, would force judges to not reopen cases, but reopen sentencing and take a second look at sentencing and a whole lot of variables in that. In fact, when I was told that it was definitely coming, we were in an autism advisory council, and they were talking about how autistic people need to be treated differently by police officers. And I recognize that autism is a real thing, it's a real situation, but it's also not a get out of jail free card.
That's right.
And so if you, as an autistic person, you do a crime, you can't shoot somebody and then claim autism as a reason for your legal or your your legal impropriety.
Mhm.
So I want to kind of get your idea on the second look, because it's a violation. It's not only it doesn't it also, Delegate elect Hamilton, it not only doesn't make sense,
Mhm.
but it's really a violation of the separation of powers, because you've just taken the legislative body and put them into the judicial body. And in fact, our Constitution says,
Mm.
in our Virginia Constitution says, that if you are a member of one of the branches, you can't be a member of another. So if you're a judge, you can't sit in the
Yeah.
House of Delegates. But that's exactly what this piece of legislation would do.
That's a really good point. Yeah, I like how you put that. I think what comes to mind with this sort of legislation is it's a victim last sort of ideology where we're constantly, these victims that have gone through heinous crimes, they've had to live out, through the whole court process and undergo this trauma. Now they're having to relitigate it and see where it goes from there. I think it's a cruel piece of legislation, to tell you the truth. And I don't know if their mindset is just as they put more judges in place that are looser at interpreting the law, that they are going to um, have more lenient sentences, or what their goal is. But in my opinion, I would like to see the courts go the other way. I would like to tighten up. And some of the legislation, I think people are going to be surprised to see that I carry, is going to be harsher penalties for evil that is done. And that's the direction I want to see us go, not giving a second look when the courts have already decided.
Yeah, yeah, and yeah, that's a good point. And the thing about it is, your predecessor, Nick Freitas, he he patroned. I went in his office one day, and he showed me some bills that he had patroned that should be bipartisan bills,
Hmm.
stiffer punishment for child sex trafficking.
Right,
And Speaker Don Scott didn't even put it in the committee. Well,
right.
why
Yeah,
wouldn't you put a piece of legislation like that in the committee? It makes no sense not to do it, because that should be bipartisan. I mean, whether you're on the right or the left, whether you're a Republican or Democratic, conservative, liberal, you should be against sex trafficking of children. I
correct.
mean,
You would think that's
we
kind of a no-brainer. Yeah.
hello. And I mean, I've learned several things about our Speaker of the House that I won't
Hmm.
say live here on the air, but I've learned a lot of things about him. And one of the things that I've learned about him is he's not too concerned with humanity.
Right.
And so once I learned some things about him, I wasn't too surprised that he let a piece of legislation like this not get heard. But
Hmm.
I'm with you, Delegate Hamilton. We need to enact laws that are stiffer
Yes.
on crime. And Nick wasn't the only one. Mark Earley, he
Hmm.
also patroned some bills that would make. I think he patroned a bill that would make uh, prostitution stiffer penalties for that. Didn't even
Hmm.
get in a committee last year. Over 150 pieces of legislation, all patroned by Republicans, did not even make it into the committees last year. Over 150.
So
And
much for democracy, right?
yeah, yeah. I mean, play by our rules, or we're gonna
Mhm.
take our toys and go to another sandbox. And
Right.
so, but
Well, they
uh,
disenfranchised millions of conservatives, represented by their duly elected delegates. So,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
um,
And like I said before, this second look legislation, it takes the legislative body and it puts them into the judicial.
mhm,
And the Constitution just does not. I've already started forming my arguments for this. The Constitution just does not allow for this. You pray for you. Will you guys pray for Delegate Elect Hamilton? And she's going to need your prayer. She's a strong, strong voice. I must say, I was very saddened to hear that Delegate Freitas was not going to run for reelection.
that's
But
right.
my sadness was soon ended when I met Delegate-elect Hamilton, because she will be the female version of Nick Freitas in the House of Delegates, and she's probably already not liked, like I'm not liked by some people, but that's just, she's already has a target on her back, I'm sure. But that when you are in the House of Delegates of the General Assembly and you are pro-life, you have a target on your back. But if you are a woman and pro-life, you have two. And so
That's
you
right.
guys, please, as our audience listens to the sound of my voice, please pray for Delegate-elect Hamilton. Every morning, lift her up before the throne room of grace, and pray that God grants her protection. Pray that God grants her perception, and God grants her freedom of liberty of speech in session, and that she can resonate truth as clearly as possible. But pray particularly for her protection as well. Pray for the VAIB, and pray that as we travel from one corner of the Commonwealth to the other, as we read legislation, as we try to discern it and keep God's people free to practice their religion, pray that God would grant us protection. Well, Delegate-elect Hamilton, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm going to let you go about 19 minutes early, 19 or 18 minutes early. And my producer's over here. He's ready. He's shaking his head at me because I usually don't get off early. I usually go long. But thank you. Thank you for joining. Any last words that you'd like to say to our audience tonight?
Well, I just want to say thank you for having me. I enjoyed this discussion, and I just appreciate the work that you guys do, informing Virginians of their religious liberties and how we need to stand up against the threats for those, but also holding legislators' feet to the fire. We need it. We need the accountability, and I appreciate you being there every day to do that. I just want to encourage the audience. Be outspoken in your church. We need everybody to be engaged at this time. Michael can't do it alone. I can't do it alone. We've got some strong voices right now, but we really need the entire church to engage on these moral issues. And so just thank you for listening this evening. And I encourage you to just stay engaged, read the updates, and stay in the fight.
Yes. Thank you, Delegate Hamilton. And it's no such thing as separation of church and state as well as it's being interpreted today.
That's right.
Separation of church and state was not to keep the church out of the state. It was to keep the state out of the church. And so the church, God ordained three institutions: the family, the government, and the church. He expects us to be involved in all three. And so God's people need to be involved in their government. I'm not saying that every Christian in the church needs to run for office. I wish they would, because then maybe we would have that moral and religious society that John Adams talked about. But I'm not saying that every Christian has to run for office, but every Christian has a responsibility before God to be informed.
That's right.
Okay. We have no excuse, church, for not being informed about what's going on in Richmond. We cannot claim ignorance, and we should not be ignorant about what's going on. So as Delegate-elect Hamilton has said very clearly, be informed, be outspoken about your religious liberty, because I remember hearing this as a young person growing up. No freedom has ever been taken away from us. We've given it away, if nothing else, by our silence. Our passivity gives our freedoms away. And so the church needs to be engaged. Somebody told me the other day, Delegate, that it was the day after the election, that the Virginia Assembly of Independent Baptists is needed now more than ever, because we are fighting a massive battle. But I will tell you, VAIB has a friend in Delegate-elect Hamilton, and we have a co-laborer, and we have someone that is speaking the same message that we are. And so pray for her. And again, Delegate, I want to say thank you for being with us tonight. And if you have any questions about VAIB, email me at director@vaib.org. If you want to sign up for our Capital Alerts to keep you informed about what's going on in Richmond, then email us at director@vaib.org, or give me a call at 804-960-4014, or visit our website, www.vaib.org. Well, thank you for listening tonight, Delegate-elect Hamilton. Again, thank you. It was our honor to have you on tonight, and appreciate you so much for being here.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, folks, for joining. Thank you for watching. God bless you, and we'll see you in a week.